Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Hingham, Hingham Master Plan Forum tonight. My name is Liza O'Reilly. I've been a member of the League since 2011, and I had the privilege of serving on the Master Plan Committee as the school committee representative to the Master Plan. On the floor of town meeting added a school committee member, which was new for Hingham, so I was able to join in. And joining us tonight is the chair of the Hingham Master Plan Committee, Gordon Carr, who also serves on the planning board. He was elected to the planning board in 2017 and is going to finalizing his first term. And he's serving through 2022. He was the chair of the Master Plan Committee and a key initiator of making sure the master plan happened again. And it was brought to town meeting in 2019. And also joining us tonight are two other members of the Master Plan Committee. Donna Smallwood, who's also a League member. She was a town moderator appointee to the committee. And Liz Klein, who was a select board appointee and is now currently a member of the Hingham Select Board. But I'm going to turn it over to Gordon, and he's going to provide some background on the development of the master plan and where we are now. The draft has been approved by the planning board and it's about to be released to the community. So we're going to have a good overview and understanding of all the work that was done to prepare this. So Gordon.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So happy to be back together with Liza and Liz and Donna. We spent an awful lot of time together. Hold on just a moment. Let me try to pull this off. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
So I have just a couple of slides to go through, well, maybe a bit more than a couple, but just to give you some context on what the master plan is, how we got to where we are, and a sort of high-level discussion about the vision and goals that we came to. At the end of the day, we ended up with something in the neighborhood of 146 recommendations in the plan, so I'm not going to go through all of those. But they will be available for folks to review shortly. But I want to get through this and then really open it up to questions you may have or clarifications and all of that. And at that point, Liz and Liza and Donna can keep me honest and correct anything that I said wrong. So very briefly. So a master plan is something that's statutory under Mass General laws for cities and towns to do from time to time, and it's a whole series of different policy discussions, some of which are memorialized in the statute, and at least a couple, which I'll get to when we talk about them, are a bit more discretionary. But it's a long-range view of where we want the town to get to, and some guideposts on how we want it to get there. It's not, as I said a lot, the sound of it, a master plan suggests that some sort of directive, binding requirement for the town to follow, and it's not that. It's a bit more of an organic document that needed to be reviewed with some frequency. And I'll give some examples of that. The last master plan that Hingham had done was in 2001, and it's generally accepted that they should be done every 10 years or so. And so come 2017, that's, as Liza said, I started chirping about the need to sort of update the master plan when I was running for office. And so once I got there, fortunately, town meeting agreed, and we were very fortunate to have such a great team on the master plan committee. And this is the full list. I know Liza gave you the folks that are in the meeting now. I knew a couple of these people before the the process, but many I didn't. And it really was just an honor to be able to work with all of these folks. It was, as you might imagine, and I'll get into it in the process a little bit, the bulk of this was done during the pandemic, right? We started just beforehand, but then we were doing it this way, which I was very concerned was going to have all kinds of complications in the process. It turned out, in some ways to be a bit of a blessing, and I'll get to why in a bit more. Here are just some images to give you a sense of what the master plan will look like. It's currently being finalized from a formatting and publishing perspective. But as Liza said, the planning board approved it a couple of months ago after receiving it in the spring from the master plan committee, receiving the draft. And because it is a product of the planning board, that's the only approval that's required is for the planning board itself to adopt it. These are the key elements of this master plan: housing, land use, natural resources. The one that I'll point out to, not surprisingly, that was in this plan that wasn't in the 2001 plan were the topics of sustainability and addressing issues of climate change, which has come on with some vigor, and we spent quite a bit of time on that because we do think, for a variety of reasons, both recreational and public facilities and others, requires a great deal of attention in the near term. It was a bit interesting to look back on some of the recommendations from the 2001 plan, and there are continuing elements to them. There's a lot of consistency, interestingly, between what were priorities in 2001. There are differences as well, of course, but what we did not actually use the 2001 plan as a starting point, right? We as a committee, looking at this in 2019 and 2020, did much more of a kind of forward-looking thing, but looking at, I mean, we looked at it, but we didn't use it as sort of the baseline starting point. Ultimately, kind of woven throughout the plan is because as planning is, as the planning board's role is primarily a land use exercise, right? And so, as I said, in 2019, we kicked this off. The town meeting approved it in the spring. I think we had our first meeting in September as a committee, and one of the first pieces was we were all really committed to a robust outreach effort. We had a consultant team that we had hired, and they had some programmatic stuff with a series of meetings and visioning sessions and that kind of thing. And partly because we had 15 members on the committee that were really energized about this, we were able to do lots of community outreach. We had 6 major visioning sessions. We had targeted visioning sessions with seniors and with students that both Liz and Liza spearheaded, which was such a great addition, right? They did them, I think, at 3 different schools, right? You did at South, at the middle school, and at the high school. Is that right?
Yes, that was correct.
And then we farmed out committee members to do what are called meeting in a box, which were slightly more targeted or smaller visioning sessions with particular groups. We had then the consultant team had core assessment meetings with staff at town hall. And then finally, we put together an online survey, which ran for a couple of months and got nearly 1,000 responses. A huge portion of them were not participants in the other sessions that we did. So we felt really confident that we got a great deal of feedback from the community on which to base our conversations. And I was so grateful that everybody leaned in on this, and we were able to do all of this through the end of January and the beginning of February of 2020, not knowing what was coming. But the fact that we were able to do all of that in person and get all of that information was hugely helpful. And from all of that information and from that feedback from the survey and from those sessions, the master plan committee developed this vision of what we're going to look like. And we targeted 2035 being the 400th anniversary of the town. So we're looking a little bit more than 10 years out, but it seemed like an elegant slot in time to mark. And I won't read all of these. I'll let you take a look at them. But these were the foundations on which the policy discussions and the recommendations that followed were based. Again, there was a bit of similarity to the 2001 vision, which is appropriate, right? Our town has pretty strong traditions in a lot of these areas, but it was nice to hear that we still care about a lot of the same stuff that we did 20 years ago, and we have some new ideas on certain things. There were a number of recommendations from 2001 that were accomplished, and there are a few that are that find their way into the recommendations in this plan as well. One of the things that I'll get to in a bit is that the committee was really committed to figuring out how to make this sort of live going forward. That there are regular updates, there are reports to the town, and reviews of the plan based on circumstances on the ground. If we had been doing this in 2018, for example, a global pandemic would probably not have been on our radar screen, right? And being able to respond quickly and robustly to a health crisis like that would not have been contemplated. In 2001, one of the big issues that the master plan committee was focused on was Greenbush, and what did the resumption of commuter rail, and particularly the impacts to the square, what did that mean? So that was a big catalyzing discussion. There was a little bit, for example, on the horizon, there was an understanding that the shipyard market might get redeveloped, but not with any particular specifics, right? So you can only know so much when you're doing these master plans, and you set those frameworks and you set these large goals, but they need to be revisited often, right? Because circumstances change, priorities change, and so where are we now? And I can go back to any of these slides if you'd like, when we get into the conversation. But after, I might be conservative, 15 committee meetings that we had, talking about the different topics individually, and then the many recommendations that we discussed, a lot of which had broad consensus and a few of which required a fair amount of debate and deliberation, which were all held on Zoom, and as we all said, allowed everybody to participate almost 100% of the time, right? And if we had ended up doing this in the hearing rooms on the second floor of Town Hall, I'm confident that probably wouldn't have been the case. So we, sometimes I abused the privilege and the meetings went long, but we got a lot done collaboratively, collegially, over those 15 odd meetings, and voted on the recommendations, each one, which required roll call votes because it's a Zoom meeting, right? So with 15 people, that was a little bit of a process. But we wrapped up the plan functionally by the end of December of 2020. And it was drafted, the narrative was prepared largely by the consultant team. We had some suggested changes. It was submitted to the planning board in the spring. And we on the planning board had a number of hearings about it. I encouraged the board to give substantial deference to the 15 people that spent all that time putting this together, and they did. There were some technical corrections that needed to be made, some recommendations that had been approved out of that 146 that didn't make it in, and we had to put those back in, with great thanks to Donna Smallwood, who was the auditor of all of that, and my go-to to make sure that I understood and remembered what the votes were and all of that. And then in August, we approved it formally. The staff had some technical corrections that needed to be made to the narrative, understanding this is going to be relied upon for a number of years. We wanted to make sure certain facts were accurate and all that kind of thing, but it didn't change any of the content, or certainly we didn't touch the recommendations. And so now it's being kind of formatted, finalized, maps put in, all of the aggregated appendices and all of that kind of thing done by the consultant team. And we expect to have it delivered to us probably shortly after Thanksgiving, and then we'll do hopefully a more robust roadshow, more meetings like this. It'll be available on the website. People will be able to dive into it and really understand what's going on. We wanted such a strong public participation process at the beginning, and I wanted it this. We wanted at this stage as well. So, as I said, there was a strong desire to focus on the implementation of this and not to let it sit. And so we've been working. I've been doing a fair amount of research on other master plans in other towns that have had implementation structures. That have been, some that have been successful and some that have not. So there are lessons learned on both sides, and figure out whether the implementation committee is best as a clearinghouse to just track recommendations, because one of the things that Hingham is blessed with is lots of certainly standing boards and commissions and elected boards and commissions, but also so many community organizations, volunteer community organizations, Hingham Net Zero, the Unity Council, all kinds of other folks that may, or the League, that may want to pick up on some of these recommendations and advance them, just as the HDIC might, or what have you, and making sure that those things are being coordinated and being tracked and understood. We plan to put an article to create a standing implementation committee before town meeting in the spring. The point of that is to give it the sort of the heft and the authority of town meeting, as well as if there are planning exercises that we want to pursue that might require town meeting funding, that we can go back and request that in years. There is a strong implementation chapter at the end that that has some designation on who's primarily responsible. It also has some interpretation, I would say, from the consultant team on what's easy to do and what's hard to do. And Liza was leading the conversation to say, in Hingham, that may not necessarily be so, right? So we adjusted some of those, and we may find that things that we thought would be simple might be more complicated. But that's the process that we're planning to undertake. In the well, I will have that article probably for the master plan committee to review between the holidays, and then put it forward for a town meeting in the spring. So that was a speed round, but this is the opportunity for my colleagues to jump in and fill in blanks, or to answer some questions that you may have on the policies or on the process. I think we all feel really strongly that it's a good product that covers a lot of ground. We're not going to run out of things to do, for sure. Some of them require funding, some of them don't. Anyway, so we look forward. I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to your support on all of this stuff as we go forward. So I think I did that in under 20 minutes, I think. But if I left some stuff out, Liza, or if you want me to touch on something in more detail, let me know. Otherwise, let's open it up.
I think it might be good. I know you have, well, why don't we take some questions, and then you have the outline of the policies that were recommended. It might be good to share those as well, but why don't we take some questions now, if anyone has any about the process? If you put your hand up on your Zoom hand up, if you have any questions. No, I'm not seeing any. So why don't, Gordon, you have that on the PowerPoint.
I think Anne has a question.
Oh, okay.
Anne, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, the questions you're looking for now are just about the process, not about the content, right?
Well, I'll take any questions, but you know, I don't want to limit it to that. So if you have questions about the content, I'm happy to try to answer them. I don't have them all memorized, but I've got cheat sheets here and that kind of thing. So we can do that. And then as Liza said, I have another document that has a few slides on what those policies, the broader policies are under those goals, which we can go through too.
I was trying to get back to the screen of participants, but mostly what I see is the discussion meeting. I'm particularly interested in what the plan says about bicycle safety around town. I'm not talking about bicycle to get from point to point, because I think mostly it's recreational. But is there very much in the plan about bicycling?
There's a fair amount on transportation broadly, and with a safety lens on it. So there is discussion about bicycle accommodation, bike lanes on particular routes, connections, that kind of thing, because we have some bike lanes, but they're really what are often called sharrows. They're shared rows that don't really provide that much room for the bikes, and they don't all connect necessarily. So I can pull up. Well, why don't I go to the slides and we can do that and address that question.
And we did have lengthy conversations about traffic. That came out pretty loud and clear in the visioning sessions from people. And then we touched on it in a couple of different places with the policies of just people's concerns about traffic and connecting different parts of the community as well.
I'm trying to figure out why. I know I filled out some questionnaires online, but why I wasn't a participant that I remember. That doesn't mean I wasn't, because so much has happened in the last 2 years to all of us. But I was thinking not specifically about traffic, which of course is discussed all the time in Hingham, but specifically how to increase bicycle safety within that traffic and whether that was in the plan. But I don't mean to dominate with that question.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You know, I can, you know, I can pull up some of the the specific recommendations under the policy, but broadly, these were the big areas under the policy about safety for all modes and to reduce traffic congestion. I know your question was more about safety than traffic, but we did hear an awful lot about traffic during the visiting sessions as well. So there are a number of recommendations under each of these that get a little bit more granular. Nancy?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if the plan included anything about sewering more parts of town, expanding the sewering in town anywhere, and also I was wondering if it included anything about you know, rising sea level and trying to protect the village from going underwater.
Yes. So I'm just trying to find the right one. So yeah, so policy number 2, I'm going to answer your second question first. We spent a lot of time talking about what the implications are for sea level rise as a coastal community like this, including the protection of some critical infrastructure and figuring out what we can do. Now, all of these things are extraordinarily expensive and we can't really do them on our own. But we spent a lot of time talking about putting this in sort of the near term priorities. And then on the sewer question, we didn't, I don't think there was a great appetite, and I'll defer to my colleagues on expansion of the sewer district beyond North Hingham and some of the others. There was some discussion about some wastewater treatment in South Hingham if there's going to be any redevelopment, residential or otherwise, in South Hingham. You know, there was quite a bit of discussion about if we're going to promote non-residential development as a mechanism to generate additional necessary revenue while protecting the residential taxpayer, that certain portions of South Hingham are likely to be desirable, but need both water and wastewater, right? So, but I think that would be a bit more targeted and development driven, rather than sort of extending it throughout the town. I don't know if that answers your question, Nancy, sufficiently, but.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering about the sewer because it seems to me that a while back there was some plan to do a study to extend the sewer to the library. Does that ring a bell?
I'll look to my more experienced folks. It doesn't ring a bell to me, but that,
Okay,
you know,
that's okay. Yes, you've answered my question. Thank you very much.
sure. So why don't we'll go through these, a couple of these in order. So, so under honor town character, that tends to capture both sort of what we want to preserve and about town, including the historic, both buildings, resources, and just history broadly. It also covers the priorities of open space, which is consistent from 2001 for sure. And one of the things that I think a number of us are excited about is this idea about not only preserving our history and our historic sources, but frankly leveraging them in a way of making more people aware, researchers and others, about what we have here, much the way peer towns like Concord have done, that can both support the economy while also generating more support for the preservation of those historic assets. So there are many different recommendations under this policy that address all of the items on the list, and I'll just flip through these, but if you see somebody that has a question on any of these, then I can pause and
Okay,
we can
yeah,
answer them.
anyone participating, put your hand up on the Zoom hand.
So we had a bit of discussion about the goal of carbon neutrality or net zero, and setting a timeline. We chose to follow the state goal 50, and you know, even that will take quite a bit of work, and we're really excited that the Climate Action Plan committee is already underway and looking at some of those elements, and we'll be making some recommendations both for us as citizens, but also for town government. But you know, the pace of discussion on decarbonization is really extraordinary. I see it in my day job quite a bit. So I think that will continue to be a major priority. And as I said, that doesn't show up in the 2001 master plan. So this is the transportation and safety. There's a lot of desire to provide alternative modes to connect throughout the town, whether that's a trolley system, for example, that might be able to get folks that would take the boat in from Boston over to downtown to shop, or to get folks that don't drive to World's End or to Derby Street or what have you on a sort of a town sponsored shuttle trolley system, something like that. There are some demonstration projects. MassDOT occasionally makes some funding available for pilots, that kind of thing. So we want to make sure that these things are, a lot of this is putting things on the list, on people's radar screen. So when opportunities come, whether those are privately supported opportunities or public funding opportunities, that we can point to it and say, yeah, this is a priority to the town. This is something that we identified as a need. So staff or volunteers go chase that opportunity. So that's one of the reasons why we ended up with so many recommendations. So housing, there was a strong desire to make sure that there's there's a range of housing, including the preservation of starter homes. And that's where we got into the tear down discussion, which was in the 2001 plan, for example. And also for us to continue to focus on affordable housing. We have so many talented volunteers on the authority and on the Housing Trust that can help us continue to provide housing that's affordable, both affordable financially and technically for purposes of the state's affordable housing laws, so that as a lot of folks know, we heard a lot during the visioning sessions about the Broadstone development on Beale Street and the sheer scale of that and how that came about, because at the time we were underneath the state's threshold for affordable housing units. And there was just a desire for us to manage that a bit more carefully and monitor it so that we stay above that threshold. And we continue to develop affordable housing, but on our terms, not under a comprehensive permit under 40B. And this has to do a fair amount with some of the planning board activities, but also the idea that development is likely to come. We want that development on our terms. We want those developers to understand what our terms are and what our expectations are. And that the goal here is to provide the resources that we need for a growing town with growing needs. But that the impacts from that development are known and are mitigated to the extent possible. And also to support our small businesses and our big businesses, right? I mean, we at the planning board, we see right now, anytime a new retail tenant comes into Derby Street Shops, for example, for most reasons, they have to come to us for a pretty perfunctory approval. But I will tell you that after going through the pandemic and the concerns about real permanent disruption to the retail sector, Derby Street Derby Street Shops, now that it's there, it's a very important, certainly taxpayer, but also asset for the community. And it's been encouraging to see them be pretty nimble and continue to find new tenants. And we need them to be successful, just as we need our downtown vendors and retailers to be successful. And as I said a couple times in the meeting, we can either decide as a town that we are all going to support those businesses on our own, or we're going to find ways to get people from out of town to come and shop and support our businesses too. And I think the second is going to be certainly more successful. And so we need to find a way to support them, help them, leverage them, so that while we can preserve everything that's great about Hingham Square, we can also support those businesses. So not surprisingly, during the pandemic, healthcare and wellness on a variety of different levels, both for students and for seniors, was a big priority. And so there are a number of recommendations in this area as well that include looking at new opportunities to monitor the health and wellness of everybody across the age spectrum in town, and see what services we ought to be providing that we're not, or could provide better. And then finally, the last large bucket is our public facilities and infrastructure, which the committee was pretty unified on the need for really good long-range planning and plan preventive maintenance, and understanding what our assets are, and what we have and how we can take care of them. It's always cheaper to make some investments now than it will be to make wholesale investments in the future. Liza, you all experienced some of the satellite academic operations that were going on in the depot, right? And they were in a building that was then structurally unsound, and because we were I get it, being creative and trying to find places to do some of this stuff. Suddenly we had no place, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but you raised it, and I always thought that was such a clarifying example of why we need to do this.
Yeah, and I think too, what we're going through now with having, Foster School, the public safety building, the senior center, the pool, all these things at the same time. Whereas if we have more long-range planning to address them on a schedule, and knowing where they're coming, that helps everyone. And that was apparent to the whole committee, as we all came from different aspects of the town, and sort of each group had, the harbor too, with the seawalls. Every element had something that if we had done some more planning would be a little more efficient. So this was a uniform agreement with no debate on this one.
Yeah, and I think it may have been the 2019 town meeting as well, where the sort of town facilities inventory was approved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with the pandemic, priorities took over, but that's still an important thing that we hope to advance, because I think knowing what we have, as well as what other nonprofits have and that kind of thing, that we can leverage, I think is a really important first step. So anyway, those are the 7 big buckets, with some of the smaller policies underneath, and then underneath all of those are individual recommendations that advance those policies. So I'll stop there. It was a great process. So Tom, the question in the chat. So I expect the full content to be available for public review. I'm gonna hedge a little and say before Christmas, because a lot depends. It's been stretched out for a bit, and we're reliant on the consultant team, whose contract is largely done, has just been extended a number of times in order to finish this final publishing. But they're busy folks, right? So they're in a way kind of fitting us in amongst the rest of their responsibilities, and we're grateful for that. So I press, but not too hard, I guess I would say. So I expect it'll be available by then, which I think will be helpful to the extent that there are items that are going to be coming up for 2022 town meeting that folks can refer to this plan. And see where it stands, and see where the group of us were standing at the time, and where the visioning sessions told us in 2019 and 2020. So I'm going to say early December, if that's satisfactorily vague. And it's what was nice about it. There were a few just sort of moments where, for example, in one of the visioning sessions in our hearings, Diane DiNapoli encouraged us to look at creating a commission on disabilities to help SNAP and others advance the importance of supporting differently able people on a variety of levels. And through that conversation, Mary Power reached out and said, we have a commission on disabilities. It just has been vacant, right? You don't need to create one. And so they appointed Diane and Keith German and a couple of other people. And so now we have a standing, robust and really active and energized commission on disabilities, which sort of came out of the process, not even the actual end of the plan, which, you remember those stories, and it's just sort of an encouraging thing to think about. So that's where we are. The implementation will be the real work. I don't anticipate there'll be 15 people on the implementation committee, but there are some good models out there that we're trying to follow. I do hope we adhere to the recommendations to do sort of annual reports or summits on where things stand. There was a lot of talk about sort of improved coordination among the standing boards and committees that the town has, because there's just, it's a happiness problem in some ways, but there's just so much going on. And I expect that several of you were either aware of or participated in the Hingham Civics Association that Deirdre Anderson convened. Geez, I can't remember when it was. In spring, it must have been, at the Historical Society, which was a gathering of all of the volunteer organizations in town. Not all of them, but lots of them. And it was just so empowering to see this number of people so engaged and passionate and knowledgeable on particular topics, that the resources available for us to actually move the needle on some of these recommendations is all there. So I'm still quite optimistic about the implementation side.
Do we have any more questions or comments?
Liz Klein, what did I miss?
Oh. Anne Fenton, you have another question?
Yes. I'm wondering exactly what will be taken to town meeting. Will it be the whole plan, or will we be voting on sections of it, section by section? And if you didn't say, what is the expectation or plan for implementation? I think I missed that at the end of your comments.
Right. So that's what you'll see at town meeting will be the creation of an implementation committee. The approval of the plan actually just rests with the planning board. So that has been done. The plan has been finalized and approved. It doesn't require any further approval either by the select board or by town meeting. Having said that, actually doing any of these things, right, actually executing on most of the recommendations will likely require the approval of town meeting. So the plan and the parameters, the vision is set, but what we end up doing, right, and how we do it, that power still will remain with the members of town meeting. But next spring, we'll put together a warrant article to create a master plan implementation committee, which will be the next phase, right? Town meeting will thank the 15 of us for our service, send us on our way, and then empower an implementation committee to pick it up from, figure out how to prioritize, work with the select board, work with others on which of these recommendations we're able to accomplish, track it, update us, report, all of that kind of stuff. So that will be a new group the town meeting will have the ability to approve.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more question. So we've seen the policies and the broad recommendations. Within this, should I assume that there are some examples of each of these? Because I'm sorry, I've had experience with developing a master plan, but my experience goes back to 1990. So
Right.
it's pretty old.
Well, and many places do them differently, right? In our case, and with the help of the consultant team that we had, they provided us a number of suggestions, yes, specific steps about how to prioritize and protect historic buildings and resources, for example, some actual tangible things that we can do, and those fall into those recommendations that are just underneath. And there frankly just so many of them that I couldn't go through them all this evening. But that's what you'll see when we publish the entire thing in December. They're itemized in each of the different chapters, and then they're aggregated in a full implementation chapter at the end of the plan.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, sure. I mean, it's a buffet. There's something for everybody in that list. I assure you. Kathy?
First of all, thank you. I mean, it's just really a daunting amount of work. I find it hard to have a 10-year plan for myself, let alone an entire community. So I appreciate your commitment to doing this for us. And out of that, I sort of have two questions. First of all, I was wondering, what was the biggest struggle among the group in making this plan? And secondly, out of this, what do you see as the biggest challenge to implement?
Second one first. This is going to sound sort of trite, but funding is probably one of the biggest challenges to most of these recommendations, right? We're battling for resources on a lot of fronts, right? I mean, the town has prioritization challenges for its funding now, right? And here we come with 140 new ideas, right? So how we prioritize those and how they fit in and how they might be able to be phased or staged or timed. I think that's probably the biggest challenge. What was our biggest struggle? I think that's a good question. I just, most of it was really logistics and mechanics, right? How to do all of this, because the conversations, the struggle was not in getting people to participate, engage, share opinions, and all that kind of stuff. We had plenty of that in all of our meetings. And as Liza said, we had expertise on, from all different corners, so if we needed somebody to help us kind of walk through some of the elements of affordable housing, we had that. Or we had Bob Heidel from the Conservation Commission, who knows a little bit about sustainability, right? So, while we had the consultant team and their specialists and experts, just around our table, we had a bunch of that expertise as well. So, but perhaps I have a romantic view of the process, and maybe Liz or Liza could have better memories of where the struggles were.
Yeah, I can add, we didn't really struggle. I would say our most in-depth conversations were about housing, and not affordable housing for sure, but then also some of the zoning challenges of, we're worried about tear downs from changing neighborhoods to the environmental impact of larger construction, to making it affordable, that, if you have a tear down house that was, $400,000, $500,000, developer will swoop in and rebuild it, and it becomes a multi-million-dollar house. And then what happens to those, affordable units, if you can call that affordable? So we had lengthy conversations about all of those housing type issues. And then the other thing was sustainability and the environmental impacts. We covered a lot of elements of that, from, meeting the climate action objectives to what would flooding happen, if we have storm surges that are breaching our seawalls, and water going into downtown or into the sewer system, or, even water systems, and how would, a catastrophic environmental impact happen on the operation of our town. And so those were kind of the two areas that we had, I'd say, in-depth conversations about the most. Liz, did you have anything else to add to that?
Great job, Gordon. And thank you, Liza. I was just going to add, one challenge was just doing it during the pandemic, right? So resisting the urge of redoing everything in kind of crisis mode, and staying focused on really developing a plan that would be relevant for 10 to 15 years. But also, not ignoring the pandemic, and trying to be sure that we were incorporating what was necessary from a public health perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? We're, someday the pandemic will end, right? And we still need to go forward. But at the time, it was really hard, if you remember, to contemplate that, right? So trying to plan long term when we really had no idea what sort of the coming weeks were going to bring was
Right.
Was a trick. It's true.
Anyone else have questions, comments?
Well, thank you all very much, right? We, the success of the implementation is going to be, the energy and the passion of the town, and the engagement. We all celebrated the amount of engagement that we have in town with the volunteers and that kind of thing, and how that needs to be sustained, going forward. And the league is at the center of that, right? You all, from an education perspective and a mobilization perspective, are so important for that energizing of the citizens and the volunteers. So I'm grateful for all of what you do, and I look forward to your support in the right areas once we move into implementation.
Great. Well, thank you, Gordon, for joining us and putting together the presentation. We really appreciate it. We've been following this, knowing that the project was going on. So thank you for joining us this evening and joining the league.
Of course, and if any of you are involved in other organizations that you think would have some interest in this, let me know, because I really do want to make folks aware of it. We had a lot of engagement at the beginning, as I said, through the visioning, but I want to make sure that that we continue to have that sort of awareness. So thank you all very much.
Great. Kathy,
Thank you.
Stop the recording, and then